Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's talk about how chemistry of the pollutants can affect their toxicity and their spread in the environment. In this lesson, we are not going to talk about the actual chemistry of the pollutants, but how chemistry can play a role in their toxicity. Now, pollution effects are not always entirely defined by the initial nature of the contamination. It is not always the case that if a pollutant is toxic or having a very toxic structure or very strong structure, that does not entirely means that it is going to cause much damage to the environment and living organisms. Why so? When that pollutant or any other pollutant is introduced in the environment, it comes into contact to so many other things, the biotic factors as well as abiotic factors. And there are so many other pollutants as well which are present in the environment. And this interaction of the pollutant with the environment, with the both biotic and abiotic factors, will define how that pollutant will ultimately act and how the toxicity of the pollutant, what the toxicity of the pollutant will be. So it is not easy to say how a pollutant will act when it is introduced in a certain environment. The reaction or breakdown products of a given pollutant can sometimes be more dangerous than the original substance. Moreover, on the other hand, sometimes it so happens as well that a pollutant is broken down into other compounds, but the product of this reaction, this breakdown reaction, are ultimately much more toxic as compared to the original parent compound. So that causes much more damage to the environment. Obviously, this is not the goal of the environmental biotechnology. We always look towards the reactions which can break down a more toxic compound into a less toxic compound, or maybe least toxic compound. But sometimes opposite can also happen. Sometimes the products can be much more toxic as well. So it is not easy to define, to estimate, to measure, to analyze what would be the effect of a pollutant in the environment when it is exposed. It depends not only on its structure but also on the environment in which it is being exposed, on the biotic parameters of that environment as well as abiotic parameters of that environment. The principle underlying much of practical bioremediation is obviously the breakdown of pollutants to form less harmful products. That's what we want when we talk about bioremediation, but we not always get what we want. So in many cases the reaction is opposite, and much more harmful substances can be created out of a less toxic substance. Other substances present and the geology of the site may also influence the outcome. जब भी एक pollutant इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ है किसी एनवायरनमेंट में, वहाँ जाता है और वहाँ जाके वो इंटरेक्ट करता है बाकी अदर पोल्यूटेंट से, बाकी दूसरे केमिकल से. सो when that happens, a pollutant's natural properties can be affected and can be altered. For example, a pollutant was naturally persistent, but once it comes in the environment and once it is exposed with other pollutants, it may undergo certain reactions with those pollutants, with those chemical compounds, and the ultimate structure which is formed might be less persistent as compared to the original compound. Same goes with the toxicity, same goes with the mobility and all other properties of that pollutant. So it is not easy to see what could be the fate of a pollutant in the environment. It depends on the environment itself too. So it depends on the geology as well कि उसका outcome क्या होगा. Both synergism and antagonism are possible. This could happen that the toxicity of a compound might get increased when introduced in the environment, because it can happen that the compound comes into contact with other pollutants which together make a much more toxic structure, or they may increase its toxicity, or they may increase its persistence and other such properties which add to the toxicity of the pollutants. So this can happen. On the other hand, it can also happen that once a toxic compound is introduced in the environment, it may come across with other compounds which actually when they react with it, they make such a structure which is of less toxicity, or which is not that much stable, itna persistent nahi hai, or which is not much mobile, so it is not spread out in the environment. All these things can happen So we cannot just easily say what could be the fate of pollutant when it is introduced in an environment. It depends on the environment. Obviously, it depends on the pollutant itself, its properties, physical, chemical properties as well. But it also depends on the environment in which it is being introduced, and on the biotic and abiotic factors present in the environment. I will see you in next lessons.